Welcome back to Cheddar's News Wrap. International issues are taking center stage today. In addition to continuing tensions in the Middle East, which we will get to shortly, the world's attention is now focused squarely on Belarus. Under orders from the country's president, authorities from Belarus forced a Ryanair civilian flight to land in their country and then proceeded to board the plane and arrest an opposition activist and journalist. A military plane forced the plane to land. The flight was going from Greece to Lithuania. The move is drawing widespread condemnation from world leaders, with the EU slapping sanctions on this country this evening. So joining us now to discuss is Hagar Chemali, host of Oh My Word on YouTube. She's also the former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the UN. Hagar, thank you so much for being here. Can you just take us through your initial reaction when you heard of this act by Belarus?
You know, I feel like I shouldn't be surprised because Mr. Lukashenko, who leads Belarus, sort of, I use the term Mr. deliberately because there is no evidence pointing to the fact that he won any presidential election last year. And he rules with an iron fist. He has been quashing dissent and peaceful protests since last year for a long time. And so on one hand, I feel like I shouldn't be surprised, but on the other, this is so wildly outrageous for a state to go hijack an airplane that is an international flight. And they did it because it flew over its own airspace, and they came up with a lie to do it, right? So they told the pilot that there were explosives on board and forced the plane down with Belarus fighter jets, forced it down, and then it was clearly not the case. It was a complete fabrication. They did it to arrest this opposition blogger. You know, the thing that I'm trying to wonder about is how threatening could this blogger have been for them to go to that extent to hijack an airplane and do it? And the thing that makes it so outrageous and concerns me the most is that, does this set a dangerous precedent now, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, usually when you are an oppositionist, you are safe in another country if you are criticizing a government that usually would take action against you. And this kind of message says that for those at least criticizing Belarus, the Belarusian government, they're not safe anywhere. But does this give an idea to countries like China and Russia and Iran to do similar? It's really scary.
You just touched a second ago on my next question. What do we know about this journalist and why he is seen as such a threat to Belarus?
Well, he's quite outspoken and has been for a long time. And he is himself, you know, he merges the two professions where he is both oppositionist, dissident, activist, and he is also a journalist and a well-respected blogger. He's got a large following. And when it comes to repressive regimes like the Belarusian one, they are afraid of journalists and bloggers and activists of all kind. Anybody that could tell the truth, anybody that could have a following and sway the public, right? Now, I'm still trying to understand why the focus on him in particular. He did say that he had received previous threats. He knew that when the plane was landing in Minsk, he apparently pleaded with flight attendants, telling them not to release him from the airplane because he knew he would be arrested, and he said he was a refugee. So he clearly was worried for his life and knew that he was being targeted.
Yeah, I read accounts this morning that he had his hands in his face and he was shaking, other passengers saying this, and him saying essentially that he thought he was going to get the death penalty if he got off that plane and stood in Belarus. You know, we just mentioned the EU slapping sanctions on Belarus this evening. Can you talk about those sanctions? Do you think they're enough and they're going to be effective here?
I'm glad you asked about that because I worked in sanctions a long time at the Treasury Department. I'm a big believer in sanctions, in pushing and, you know, for a better outcome and deterring bad behavior. Unfortunately, with Belarus, U.S. sanctions have not had a strong role. The EU sanctions have the biggest potential, but they have not been strong enough yet. Even the ones that they claim to be agreeing to now, they're not strong enough. Now, EU sanctions are a big deal, and the reason is because they require consensus from all the member states. And that's really hard to get. I mean, imagine here if that were the case. So they're very hard to achieve. So the fact that the EU has come out and said that they've agreed to sanctions is great, but they really need to make sure that not just sanctions are placed, but that business ties between the EU and these big Belarusian companies that benefit Lukashenko himself, the leader, that those are cut off, because that's where he's going to feel the hit the most.
You know, this is a story obviously we're going to continue to follow. While I have you here, I am running up against the clock and I want to get this question in. The other big story that we're following today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to the Middle East to facilitate, peace talks amid a really fragile, peace talks between Gaza and Israel. Do you think Blinken's arrival will help negotiations on both sides, especially lasting peace talks negotiations?
No, I think that, he has said that he's not going to restart long-term peace negotiations because the fact is the Biden administration knows that the chances for that right now are zero. And there are many, many reasons for that. But one of the obvious reasons is that there is no negotiating partner on the Palestinian side, right? The Palestinian Authority is very weak. That is the government based in the West Bank. They're very weak. In fact, they postponed their own domestic elections because they were allegedly concerned that Hamas would win. Hamas is the terrorist organization that governs Gaza, and Hamas is the one that started the violence when it escalated by lobbing rockets, right? So that's Hamas versus the Palestinian Authority. So given their own domestic issues, it's a very difficult time to start negotiations. That said, he's going there to make sure that this ceasefire holds and to negotiate with both the Israeli side and as well as the Palestinian side, again, not Hamas. The United States doesn't negotiate with Hamas, but with the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, the capital of the Palestinian territories, to explain to them why they need to make sure this ceasefire holds and ensure that nothing happens again. Now, things are very shaky there. I would not be surprised if there's more conflict in the near future, at least. You still have clashes on the ground, even following this ceasefire. It's very tenuous, but he's there at least to tell them, you got to keep this, you got to keep the stability for now, and let's focus on humanitarian aid and reconstruction, and then just to set the framework for potential future talks. But he's not launching long-term talks right now.
Gotcha. Hagar, thank you so much for your insight and really chiming in on these two major stories that we are following and the rest of the world are also following. Hagar Chemali, thank you.